It was a cold night in June, the kind of night where the lake air carried the smell of wet earth and freshly cut grass. Cedar Ridge was usually quiet at this hour. Houses along the shoreline were dark, curtains drawn, neighbors long asleep. But on the Sullivan property, the silence had already been broken. Red and blue lights pulsed against the wooden siding of the cabin. The beams reflected off the windows like a warning beacon, painting the front porch in shifting colors of law and authority. Jack Sullivan stood there on the porch, his boots heavy against the old planks, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He wasn't pointing it at anyone. He wasn't waving it around. He was simply holding it, the way a man does when he's on his own land. Walking his rounds after hearing coyotes circling the chicken coop, next to him, Max sat steady, ears forward, tail still, 11 years old now, a retired German Shepherd K9, but there was nothing soft about him. Max had served with Jack before different places, different battles, but the same bond tied them together. Where Jack stood, Max stood. Where Jack moved, Max moved. And when danger came close, Max always knew first. Jack's breath formed small clouds in the night air, his eyes fixed on the police cruiser parked in the gravel driveway below. Another pulled up behind it, headlights sweeping across the yard. The officers inside weren't from his world. Young men, maybe early 30s, uniforms still crisp, hands hovering near their belts. They weren't here because they wanted to be. They were here because someone had called them. "Mr. Sullivan," one of them called out, his voice carrying over the hum of the cruiser's engine. "We need you to come down and speak with us." Jack didn't move. He shifted the rifle closer to his side. The barrel angled toward the ground. His voice was calm, steady. "You can speak to me right here," he said. "This is my porch. This is my land. Whatever business you've got, it can be handled right here." Max let out a low growl, not a bark, not yet, just a warning, from the edge of the driveway. The crunch of tires on gravel announced a third vehicle. A shiny white SUV rolled up, spotless even under the dust of the rural roads. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. Linda Graves, chin raised, lips pressed tight, cell phone clutched in her hand like a badge of power. She wasn't law enforcement. She wasn't an elected official. She was president of the local homeowners association, or at least that's what she called herself. She had been trying to force Jack to join the HOA since the day he moved into Cedar Ridge, but Jack's property wasn't part of it. His deed was clear, no covenants, no association. He'd bought this land for exactly that reason. Freedom, independence. No one telling him what flag he could fly or what color his porch should be. But Linda didn't care about deeds or maps. She cared about control. And tonight, she was going to use the police to get it. "That man is brandishing a firearm," she shouted from behind the open SUV door. Her voice was sharp enough to cut through the night. "He's threatening his neighbors. And that dog is dangerous. This is a covenant neighborhood. He has to comply." Jack's jaw tightened. Max stood, body stiff, ears pinned forward. The younger officer glanced at his partner, uncertainty written across his face, brandishing threats. Dangerous dog. Words that sounded heavy when written in a report, words that could turn a quiet standoff into something explosive. Jack kept his voice level. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm holding a rifle on my property. That's legal. My dog's not dangerous. He's disciplined. You want to talk? We'll talk here, but I'm not stepping off this porch." The second cruiser door opened. A tall man climbed out, broad-shouldered, silver in his beard. Sheriff Cole Dawson. He carried himself like someone who had seen plenty and was tired of seeing more. The younger officers deferred to him immediately. Dawson looked at Jack, at the rifle resting steady against his arm, at the German Shepherd watching him with soldier's eyes. Then he turned toward Linda. "Mrs. Graves," he said, boy slow but carrying authority. "This property line ends at Birch Lane. Sullivan's deed says no covenants. He's not under your age. That's the law." Linda's face twisted, but she didn't back down. "He's threatening this community. Sheriff, you can't just let him wave a gun around like some outlaw." Dawson looked back at Jack. "Keep that rifle pointed down, hands where we can see them." His tone wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was the voice of a man trying to keep order while the ground shifted beneath him. Jack gave a short nod, adjusting the rifle so the barrel faced the porch boards. Max didn't move an inch, though his gaze never left the SUV. Then something changed. Dawson's eyes flicked toward Linda's vehicle. On the passenger seat, half hidden beneath papers and a leather folder, lay a white binder. The top page bore a red stamp across it. Bold block letters, Lion. The sheriff's expression shifted, just slightly. A tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. He knew something. And at that moment, Max stood up. His fur bristled. His body angled toward the tree line beside the property. His growl deepened, rumbling like thunder before a storm. Jack followed his line of sight. Shadows stirred between the lilac bushes and the fence. Something or someone was out there. "Max, heel," Jack ordered, his voice sharp, but the dog didn't obey. His focus was locked on the darkness. Sheriff Dawson raised a hand, his voice cutting through the night. "Nobody moves." Then Jack heard it. Faint, metallic, unmistakable, the soft clink of wire cutters closing on steel. The growl from Max still hung in the air when Linda Graves made her move. She stepped out from behind her gleaming white SUV, phone held high like it was a badge of authority. The red and blue strobes from the cruisers flicked across her face, catching every sharp line of her scowl. "There," she shouted, pointing at Jack on the porch. "That man is brandishing a firearm. He's threatening his neighbors, and that dog of his, that animal is a menace." Her voice cut through the night like broken glass, shrill and certain. She wasn't talking to Jack. She wasn't even really talking to the deputies. She was talking for the record, for the body cams she assumed were running, for whatever audience might one day hear her side of the story. The younger of the two town officers shifted uncomfortably. He was barely 30, new to the badge, eyes darting between Jack's rifle and Max's tense posture. His hand hovered just above his holster, not drawing, but not relaxed either. His partner, older and thicker around the middle, tried to steady the situation. "Mr. Sullivan," he called out, his tone practiced and procedural. "We just need you to come down here and talk this through." Jack didn't move. The porch boards creaked as he shifted the rifle closer to his body, barrel angled down toward the floor. His voice was low, steady, the kind of voice that didn't bend to shouting. "You can talk to me right here. My deed's clear. This land is outside your covenants. I'm not part of any association. Never have been. Never will be." Linda let out a short, bitter laugh. "Don't you twist this, Sullivan. This entire neighborhood falls under Willow Lake HOA jurisdiction. You don't get to opt out because you feel like it." Jack's jaw tightened. "Check the county records. My parcel stops at Birch Lane. It was sold separate. No covenants. That's why I barred it." For a moment, no one spoke. The younger officer's eyes flicked to his partner, unsure what to do next. This wasn't the kind of call he'd been trained for. A noise complaint, a traffic stop, that was familiar ground. But a standoff between a homeowner with a rifle and a self-declared HOA president, that wasn't in the manual. Then the gravel crunched under heavy tires, and all heads turned. A black Ford Explorer pulled in behind the cruisers, its headlights cut across the yard before snapping off. The driver's door swung open, and a man climbed out. "Sheriff," called Dawson. The sheriff didn't rush. He walked slow, steady, boots sinking into the gravel with the weight of a man who knew exactly how much authority he carried. Tall, broad shoulders, a streak of gray in his beard. His presence alone shifted the air like the arrival of a commander on a battlefield. The deputies straightened instinctively, stepping back a half pace. Even Linda quieted. Though her glare never softened, Dawson looked up at the porch. He took in Jack's stance, the rifle at rest, Max still locked on the shadows by the fence. Then he turned to Linda, his eyes narrowing just slightly. "Mrs. Graves," he said, his tone even but edged with command. "This property line ends at Birch Lane. Sullivan's deed is outside Willow Lake HOA. He's not under your jurisdiction." Linda's mouth fell open for just a moment, then snapped shut. "That's not true," she shot back. "I've got maps, documents. This whole area is part of the association, not his parcel." Dawson replied flatly. "County records confirm it. His deed says no covenants, no association. That's binding." Her phone was still raised, recording or pretending to. "So you're just going to let him stand there with a gun in front of officers? You're going to let him intimidate this entire community?" Jack's eyes met the sheriff's. For a long second, neither man spoke. Max growled again, low and rumbling. The sound of the night beyond the porch pressed in wind in the trees, the faint lap of water against the shoreline, and somewhere in that darkness, the faint memory of wire cutters against steel. Dawson's voice broke the tension. "Keep that rifle pointed down, Sullivan, hands where they can see them." Jack gave a single nod, adjusting the stock so the barrel rested fully against the porch boards. His posture never broke. "Good," Dawson said. Then his eyes slid back toward Linda's SUV. The interior light had clicked on when she opened the door. Papers were scattered across the passenger seat, and on top, a white binder with a red stamp across the cover. For bold letters stared back, "Lion." The sheriff's face tightened. He knew something Jack didn't, something Linda wasn't saying. But before he could ask, Linda's voice rose again, shriller this time. "Sheriff, you have to do something. This man is a threat to order. This whole neighborhood is at risk if you don't act right now." Dawson took one long step closer to her, his shadow falling across the gravel. His tone didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "Mrs. Graves, let me be clear. Jack Sullivan is within his rights on this property. Your HOA doesn't extend here. You don't have authority. You don't have a standing. And if you keep making false claims, you're the one who's going to end up in violation of the law tonight." The younger deputy blinked, startled. The older one let out the quietest exhale of relief. Jack stayed silent, watching. Max stayed locked on the darkness near the fence line, his growl still simmering like a storm on the horizon. Linda's jaw worked as she searched for words, but nothing came out. For the first time that night, her certainty cracked. She slammed her car door shut, retreating into the glow of her SUV's interior light. The sheriff turned back toward the porch. His eyes lingered on Jack for a moment, then on the dog, before finally drifting back toward the binder in the passenger seat of Linda's SUV. The word on the cover hadn't changed, Lion, and Dawson's expression told Jack everything he needed to know. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than a petty HOA dispute, much bigger. Sheriff Cole Dawson's gaze lingered on the binder in Linda Graves' SUV. The headlights were off, but the overhead light inside the vehicle threw just enough glow across the passenger seat. He could see it clearly, a thick white binder, stamped in red with 4 unmistakable letters, Lion. Dawson's jaw flexed. It didn't show much, not in front of his deputies, and certainly not in front of Linda, but in that one small tightening of his expression, Jack Sullivan saw it. Recognition. The sheriff knew what that binder meant. Jack didn't ask. Years of service had taught him when to stay quiet, but Max, the German shepherd, shifted. His ears pricked, his head turned, and a low, rolling growl started deep in his chest. Not toward the SUV, not toward Linda, somewhere else, out there, in the dark. The deputies didn't notice at first. Their attention was still caught on the HOA president, fuming behind the wheel of her car. But Jack noticed. He always noticed Max. That dog's instincts had saved him more than once. Jack's fingers tightened around the rifle stock, though the barrel stayed down against the porch boards. His voice dropped, just above a whisper. "Do you hear that, Max?" The growl deepened. The shepherd's eyes locked on the tree line that ran along the back of the property. Thick brush, shadows pressed together like a wall. And then Jack heard it too, a faint metallic click, then another, the unmistakable sound of steel on steel. Someone out there was cutting through wire, his fence line. Jack's eyes snapped to Dawson. "You hear that?" The sheriff didn't answer at first. He raised one hand, firm and sharp, signaling silence. His eyes narrowed toward the trees, head tilted slightly. Listening. Another click, slow, deliberate. A pair of cutters closing on chain link. Dawson's hand went to his holster, unfastening the snap with a quiet flick. His voice was calm but edged with iron. "Nobody moves." The younger deputy froze mid-step. His partner stiffened. Even Linda, for her shouting, went still in her SUV, her phone dropping slightly from its raised position. The night itself seemed to hold its breath. Max's growl shifted into shop talks, loud and cutting through the still air. He lunged toward the yard, straining against the invisible line of Jack's command. "Steady, Max," Jack muttered, though his own pulse had started to climb. The brush trembled. Not much, just a faintest quiver of leaves, but enough to confirm it. Someone was there. The sheriff's voice dropped to a low command. "Eyes on the tree line. Do not fire unless I say so." The deputies obeyed, drawing their sidearms but keeping them lowered. Their breathing had changed fast, uneven. They weren't trained for this kind of tension. Jack could feel it rolling off them like static. He shifted his stance, keeping the rifle angled down but ready. His voice stayed quiet, directed at the sheriff. "That wasn't kids messing around. Those are cutters." Dawson gave a single nod. "I know." The brush stirred again, louder this time. Branches flexed, leaves shook. A shadow moved low, deliberate, staying close to the ground. Whoever it was, they weren't running. They were working, focused, intent. Max erupted in another round of barking, sharp and furious. He lunged so hard the porch boards rattled under Jack's boots. "Easy," Jack commanded, though his own nerves were stretched thin. Then it came, the clean snap of wire giving way. Every head turned. The deputies flinched. Linda gasped audibly in the SUV. Jack's instinct screamed. Someone had just breached his fence, and they weren't afraid of getting caught. Dawson's gun was out now, steady in his grip, pointed low, but ready. His voice rang out across the yard, loud and commanding. "Sheriff's Department, whoever's out there, show yourself." Silence, no movement, just a soft creak of branches in the night wind. Max barked again, straining toward the dark, teeth flashing in the porch light. Jack's got twisted. He knew what kind of men worked under cover of night, cutting fences without fear. He'd seen their type overseas, and he'd seen them here at home. The sheriff's tone hardened. Last warning. Step out. Hands visible. The silence stretched too long enough for every second to feel heavy, long enough for Jack to know whoever was out there wasn't going to step forward. And then, like an answer, the faintest sound drifted from the brush. Not a reply, not words. 3 sharp clicks, metal on metal, a signal. Jack's stomach dropped. That wasn't random noise. That was communication, a code. The sheriff heard it too. His eyes flicked once toward Jack, and in that quick exchange, both men understood. This wasn't about Linda, or her HOA, or some petty neighborhood dispute. Something bigger had just stepped onto Jack Sullivan's land, and the binder in her SUV stamped was Lion wasn't a coincidence. Dawson's voice was steady, but the weight in it pressed down on everyone present. Nobody moves. The deputy stayed frozen. Linda's eyes darted nervously between the SUV window and the tree line, her self-righteous anger gone, replaced with something else, fear. Max barked again, feral and relentless, every muscle in his body ready to launch. Jack's finger brushed the trigger guard, discipline holding him steady. But the night had shifted. The game had changed. And somewhere in the shadows beyond the fence, men with cutters and codes were waiting. The night on Cedar Ridge still pressed in around them, red and blue lights fading. Max restless on the porch, the tree line to quiet. Sheriff Dawson hadn't lowered his weapon, and neither had Jack. But as Jack's eyes stayed locked on the dock, his mind drifted back to how all this started. It hadn't begun with wire cutters in the night. It had started with a letter. 2 months earlier, the envelope had looked harmless, white stock. In Boston, a neat cursive font. Welcome to Willow Lake. Inside, a 2-page letter signed in looping, confident handwriting. Dear resident, it read, we are delighted to welcome you into our community. As a member of the Willow Lake Homeowners Association, your monthly dues are $150 payable by the 5th of each month. Failure to comply will result in fines and penalties as described in our covenant agreement. At the bottom, a bold signature, Linda Graves, HOA President. Jack had read it twice before he laughed, not a real laugh, more like a dry, bitter chuckle stuck in his throat. He'd bought the cabin on Cedar Ridge for one reason. The deed said it plain as day. No covenants, no association. That was the promise. That was why he'd left Denver, why he'd chosen this slice of land by the lake. Freedom. No one telling him how tall his grass could grow. No one fining him for parking his truck in the drive. No one dictating what flag he flew from his porch. And now, before he'd even finished unpacking, here it was. A bill, dressed up as a welcome. He crumpled the paper in his fist and tossed it on the counter. Max, lying by the stove, lifted his head and gave a grunt, as if he could sense his master's blood pressure climbing a few days later. Jack was stacking lumber in the yard when his neighbor wandered over. Howard Jenkins had lived on Birch Lane for nearly 30 years, retired electrician, skin weathered like old leather, a man who knew every fence post and water line in the subdivision. He leaned on the rail, chewing a toothpick, eyes twinkling. Do you get one of those letters yet? Howard asked. Yeah, Jack muttered. Threw it out. Howard chuckled, slow and knowing. Good. Don't pay a dime. Jack wiped sweat from his brow. So what's the story? This HOA actually a thing? Or what? Howard spat the toothpick into the dirt. Used to be, 20 years back. Bunch of folks thought they could turn Willow Lake into some kind of gated paradise. Rules about siding, mailbox colors. All that garbage didn't last. People stopped paying. Board dissolved. Covenants expired. It's been dead ever since. Jack raised an eyebrow. Then why is this woman sending invoices? Howard leaned closer, voice dropping. Because Linda Graves thinks she can resurrect it. And if enough folks buy in, she'll start acting like she runs the place. Seen her try it before. Couple streets over. She preys on new folks. Figures they don't know better. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd known bullies in uniform overseas, and he'd known them in business suits stateside. The type didn't change, just the paperwork. Well, Jack said flatly, she picked the wrong man this time. Howard grinned. That's what I like to hear. Jack hadn't let it sit. The next morning he pulled his closing documents from the safe. There it was, black and white. Parcel 17. Cedar Ridge Subdivision. Line item, no covenants, no association. He made copies and dropped them in the mail. One to the return address on Linda's letter, another to Willow Lake Compliance, the email domain she'd listed. His note was short, To the point, enclosed other deed restrictions proving my property is not subject to HOA authority. Please remove my address from all further correspondence. He signed it, folded it, sent it certified mail. For Jack, that was the end of it. Or so he thought. But silence followed. No reply. No acknowledgement. Instead, the emails kept coming. Final reminder, a second notice. Immediate action required. The threats escalated. Fines, liens, towing, none of it applied. But the pressure was the point. One evening, he'd been on the porch with Max at his side when Linda herself showed up, pulling into his drive in that spotless white SUV, rolling down the window like she was issuing a royal decree. "You're in violation," she snapped. "You owe fees. You've been sent notices." Jack had walked right up to the vehicle, papers in hand, and held them where she could see. "Read this. No covenants. No association. This property isn't yours to govern." But Linda hadn't even looked at the documents. She'd waved her hand dismissively, lips pursed. "Everyone pays. Mr. Sullivan, if you don't like it, maybe Willow Lake isn't the place for you." That was the moment Jack knew. This wasn't about grass height or mailbox paint. This was about control, about power, about money. And Linda Graves wasn't going to let go quietly. Back on the porch, in the present tense. Max growled again toward the tree line. Jack blinked, shaken from the memory, pulse thrusting in his ears. It had started with a letter. Now it had escalated to cuts in the dock, and the binder in Linda's SUV, stamped in red lion, told him the fight was only beginning. The emails started coming at dawn. Jack had just poured his first cup of coffee when the phone buzzed on the counter. The subject line read like a court order. "Immediate action required. Cedar Ridge compliance." He almost deleted it, but something about the phrasing made him click. The message was short and sharp. "Mr. Sullivan, your property remains in violation. You are subject to monthly fees and penalties. Continued refusal will result in liens, towing, and further legal remedies. Immediate payment is required. Cedar Ridge Compliance Department." No signature, no contact name, just a faceless warning shot. Jack leaned back in his chair, steam rising from the mug in his hand. "Compliance Department," he muttered under his breath. There was no such office, no legitimate authority tied to his address. It was theater, threats typed up on a screen to make him sweat. Max patted over, nudging his hand with a wet nose. Jack scratched behind the shepherd's ears and exhaled. "They think I scared that easy." But the truth was, it wasn't just noise. Someone had set up an email system, complete with headers and letterhead. Someone was spending money to make this real. And Jack knew exactly who. That afternoon, the sound of tires on gravel announced her before the SUV even turned into the drive. White paint, polished rims, spotless. Linda Graves rolled down her window with the air of a queen lowering a scepter. "Mr. Sullivan," she called, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to talk." Jack stepped off the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. He'd been repairing a section of the coop fence, hammer still hanging from his belt. Max circled at his side. "Posture alert. You've been sent notices," Linda continued, phone already in her hand as though recording him. "You're ignoring them. That is not how we do things here." Jack folded his arms, keeping his voice calm. "You're wasting your time, Linda. My deed is clean. No covenants, no association. This property isn't under your rule." Her eyes narrowed. "Everyone pays. It's about fairness, about community. You don't get to freeload while the rest of us carry the weight." Jack felt heat rise in his chest, but he held it back. "Community isn't about fines and threats. You want this neighborhood better. I'll help. I'll patch fences, fix porches, mow for the folks who can't. That's what real community looks like." Linda Scott, lips curling. "Manual labor doesn't pay for landscaping. It doesn't cover the attorney we keep on retainer. We need order, structure. That means dues." Jack shook his head. "What you want is control, and you're not going to get it here." For a moment, the mask slipped, her nostrils flared, jaw tightened. But she quickly regained the polished, clipped tone. "You can stand there and posture all you want, Mr. Sullivan, but sooner or later, everyone falls in line." She shifted the SUV into gear, gravel crunching as she pulled back. Max barked once, sharp and low, as the taillights disappeared down the road. Jack stood still, rag clenched in his fist. He'd faced down men overseas who hid behind weapons and uniforms. Now, he was staring down a woman who hid behind bylaws in fake departments. The tactics were different, but the intent was the same. Control through pressure, control through fear. That night, Jack sat at the kitchen table with the deed papers spread out again. The words "no covenants, no association" stared back at him like a shield, ironclad, unshakable. but the emails kept buzzing his phone. The threats escalated, and now Linda was showing up at his doorstep like she owned the ground beneath his boots. Jack rubbed a hand over his face, fatigue tugging at the edges of his resolve. He wasn't young soldier anymore. He didn't go looking for fights, but some fights came looking for him. Max settled at his feet, head resting heavy on Jack's boot. Loyal, watchful, steady. Jack took a deep breath and leaned back. "All right," he murmured into the still kitchen. "If they want a war, they'll find out I don't rattle easy." But deep down, he knew this wasn't going to stop with letters or emails. Pressure like this never stopped at words. It escalated, and out beyond the lake, in the shadows of Cedar Ridge, the first cracks of that escalation were already waiting. It started with a smell. Jack stepped outside just after dawn, coffee steaming in his hand, and caught the sharp taint of spray paint on the breeze. Not faint fresh. Max was already ahead of him, nose low, tail stiff. The shepherd led him toward the chicken coop at the edge of the property. That's when Jack saw it. 4 black letters scrolled across the wooden siding, dripping down the boards like an open wound. Lean. The word was crooked, rushed, but bold, the kind of mark meant to be seen. Jack set the mark on the fence post, staring at it for a long moment. His jaw flexed tight. He didn't need to look up the legal definition. He knew what it meant. A lien was a claim on property, a tool to strip ownership, to take what wasn't theirs. Only this wasn't paperwork. This was graffiti in the dark. Max barked once. "Shop," pacing the yard as if daring the intruder to step back into sight. Jack crouched low, touching the paint with a gloved hand. Still tacky, hours old, not days. Whoever did this had been here last night, right under his nose, and he hadn't heard a thing. That night, the real confirmation came. The clock read to 17 a.m. when Max's growl woke him, low, steady, the kind that vibrated through the floorboards before turned into barking that shook the walls. Jack was out of bed in seconds, rifle in hand, bare feet hitting cold wood as he crossed to the window. Max was already at the back door, fur bristled, teeth bared at the darkness outside. Through the glass, Jack forded, a shadow cutting across the yard, human, fast, ducking low along the tree line, too big for a kid, too smooth to be drunk. The figure paused for half a breath when Max barked again, then bolted. Feet pounded against gravel. Fading into the woods, Jack threw the door open, rifle raised. But by the time he stepped onto the porch, the night was empty. The only sound was Max's furious barks echoing into the dark. "Quiet, boy," Jack ordered, though his voice was tight. Adrenaline pumping, he scanned the yard, finger brushing the trigger guard, eyes sweeping the tree line. Nothing. Whoever it was, they'd moved fast, like they'd rehearsed the escape. He didn't chase. Not into those woods at night. That's how men got ambushed. Instead, he stepped down into the grass, Max clothes on his heel, and checked the perimeter. The coop, the shed, the trucks parked near the barn. No more paint, no fresh damage. But the message was clear enough. The letters on the coop weren't random. The shadow in the yard wasn't random. Somebody wanted him rattled. Somebody wanted him to feel surrounded. And for the first time since the letters had started arriving, Jack felt it sink in his gut. This wasn't just Linda and her phony this was bigger. Back inside, Jack set the rifle against the wall and sat at the kitchen table, sweat cooling on his skin. Max lay at his feet, still restless, ears twitching at every sound outside. Jack ran a hand over his face. He'd seen intimidation campaigns before on the streets of Baghdad. In the mountains of Kunar it always started the same way. First came the warnings, then came the vandals, then came the night visits, and after that it got violent. He stared at the papers on the table, his deed, the email printouts, the certified letter he'd sent weeks ago. Proof, all the proof he needed, but proof didn't matter to people who operated in the shadows. Linda Graves wasn't clever enough to organize this alone. She was the mouthpiece, sure, the face that showed up in the daylight to sneer about dues, but behind her, Jack's mind replayed the binder he'd glimpsed in her SUV. The red letters stamped on the cover, Lion. He didn't know what it meant yet, but the sheriff's reaction told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't some neighborhood power grab. This was organized, funded, structured, and they had just declared war on him. Max gave a low growl, breaking Jack's thoughts. The shepherd's eyes stayed fixed on the window, alert, ears forward, watching the darkness like he expected it to move again. Jack leaned back in the chair, exhaling slow. "Yeah, boy," he murmured, hand resting on Max's head. "I smell it too. This isn't just neighbors. This is something bigger." The letters on the coop glared back at him from the yard, black against pale wood. A warning, a threat, but also a mistake. because Jack Sullivan had lived through worse nights than this. And if they thought spray paint and shadows would drive him out, they didn't understand the kind of man who still stood guard with a rifle and a shepherd by his side. They'd made it personal, and Jack didn't back down. The storm came in the form of headlights. Jack was splitting firewood by the barn when Max's low back rolled through the yard. He turned, axe still in hand, and watched as a black SUV crawled up his gravel drive. Its tires crackled slow, deliberate, like it belonged here. Linda Graves stepped out first, heels clicking against stone. Behind her, two men emerged, bigger, broader, the kind of muscle you didn't hire to trim hedges. Travis and Reed. Jack didn't need introductions. The way they carried themselves said enough. They were here to send a message. Max planted himself between the strangers and the porch, hackles high, teeth flashing. "Call him off," Linda said, her voice sharp but to rehearse to be brave. Jack didn't move. He leaned the axe against the chopping block, wiped his palms on his jeans, and stood square. "State your business." Linda smiled thin, pulling a folded sheet of paper from her bag. "Your business is still our business, Mr. Sullivan. Cedar Ridge compliance requires you to remove that flagpole. It's a violation, and today," she glanced back at the two men, "we've come to help you comply." Jack followed her eyes toward the porch. The flag hung there, the stars and stripes moving soft in the afternoon breeze, not hurting anyone, not breaking any law, but it was his father's before him, raised and lowered with respect, every morning, every night. Jack's jaw tightened. "You touched that flag, and we're gonna have a problem." That's when the buzzing started. At first, fainter worry hum, like a nest of hornets waking up, then louder, mechanical, slicing through the sky above. All four of them looked up. A drone hovered overhead, matte black. No markings, steady as a hawk in the wind. Then, with a click, a spotlight snapped on. A blinding white cone dropped onto the yard, locking Jack in its glare. Max barked furiously, snapping at the beam. Linda's smirk widened. "See, Cedar Ridge has eyes everywhere." Jack didn't buy it. He'd seen military-grade drones overseas, the kind that could paint a target in the dark. Whoever was backing this HOA fantasy had money, serious money, and now they weren't hiding anymore. "Reed," Linda said, her voice sugar-coated with command. "Take it down." The bigger of the two men moved first, boots studding against the porch steps. His hand reached for the flagpole, fingers stretching toward the rope. Max lunged. The shepherd hit him at the knees, snarling, dragging the man off balance. Reed cursed, trying to shake him off, but Max had teeth buried in his sleeve, ripping fabric and skin beneath. "Travis." Linda snapped. The second man stormed forward, but Jack stepped in his path. No rifle this time, just two fists and a backbone hardened by years of surviving worse. Travis swung first, wild and heavy. Jack ducked, dropped his shoulder into the man's gut, and they both crashed into the railing, which splintered under the impact. The drone's spotlight tracked them, tilting, buzzing louder, as if the machine itself was watching every move. "Call them off, Jack," Linda shouted from the driveway, voice cracking now. "You're only making this harder." Jack shoved Travis back, knuckles roar, and spit into the dirt. "You don't get to dictate what flies on my porch." Reed screamed as Max tore loose another chunk of fabric, his arm now slick with blood. He swung wildly at the dog, but Max ducked, relentless, circling for another strike. The drone dipped lower, a slight narrowing, fixing tighter on Jack like he was a target in a training exercise. Jack caught sight of it, chest heaving, and for a split second he was back in Afghanistan, spotlights sweeping valleys, drones marking coordinates, men waiting for the next move. Only this time, the battlefield was his front yard, and he wasn't the one outnumbered, not with Max at his side. Travis came again, fists clenched, rage blotting out whatever orders Linda had given him. Jack sidestepped, grabbed the man's arm, and twisted hard, bone cracked like a branch snapping underfoot. Travis howled, stumbling back down the steps. Reed, bleeding, finally ripped himself free of Max's jaws. He staggered toward the flag again, desperate to finish what he'd been sent to do. "Max!" Jack barked. The shepherd spun, launching like a missile. Reed never reached the rope. He went down hard, back hitting the boards, Max's weight pinning him there, growl shaking his ribcage. Linda's confidence broke. She backed toward the SUV, boy shrill now. "Enough. Get in the car. We're done here." But the damage was done. The drone hung above them, silent, recording every second, watching Jack stand his ground, watching two of his men fail. Whoever controlled it would see the message clear. This veteran wasn't bending, not for Linda, not for Cedar Ridge compliance, not for anyone. When the SUV tore down the gravel drive minutes later, dust choking the air, the drone lingered. It circled once, twice, as if taking a final look, then it rose higher, buzz fading into the sky until the night swallowed it. Jack stood on the porch, chest burning, blood on his knuckles, Max still pacing like a soldier who hadn't heard the order to stand down. He looked up at the flag. It still hung there, rippling in the breeze, untouched. That was the victory. Small, maybe, temporary, probably, but it was his. And if the drone was sending footage back to whoever sat behind the curtain, let them watch. Let them see what it looked like when a man defended what was his. Because this was no longer about dues, or bylaws, or neighborhood politics. This was war. The flashing red and blue lights returned to Cedar Ridge before dawn. Jack stood on his porch, arms crossed, Max at his feet, as Sheriff Cole Dawson's cruiser rumbled up the drive. Behind it, a second unit pulled in, Deputy Harris at the wheel. The sound of gravel crunching under those tires felt different this time, not like a warning, like backup. Two battered men sat cuffed in the back seat of Cole's cruiser. Travis and Reed looked smaller behind the glass, bloodied and sullen. No longer swaggering muscle, Reed cradled his arm, wrapped in a quick field dressing. Travis glared at the floorboard, jaw tight, nursing his own injuries. Quite a night you had, Cole muttered as he stepped out. He adjusted his hat, eyes scanning the flag still waving on Jack's porch. Who heard half the county talking about a drone over your place? Jack's voice was steady, gravel low. Not just a drone. They came for the flag. They came ready to fight. Cole nodded once, then jerked a thumb at the cruiser. They won't be bothering you for a while. Trespass, assault, destruction of property, those charges stick. But that's not the part that worries me. Jack raised a brow. What's this? Cole walked around to the trunk of his cruiser. He popped it open and pulled out a black duffel bag. Inside, bolt cutters, spray paint cans, and a crowbar, tools of intimidation. But beneath the metal and paint was something worse, a thick leather binder, stamped in bold red letters. Lion. Jack felt his gut twist as Cole said it on the hood. Found this in their SUV, the sheriff said. Not HOA records, not anything local. He flipped the binder open. Inside were neatly clipped documents, contracts, aerial maps of Cedar Ridge, and a typed memo. Jack leaned closer, reading the top page. Lion Development Group. His throat tightened. He'd heard the name in whispers at the feed store, at the diner. A real estate giant with pockets deep enough to buy entire towns. Known for pushing out families and flipping neighborhoods into gated kingdoms. Cole pointed to a section highlighted in yellow. See that? Expansion Initiative. They've been buying land around here, piece by piece. HOAS, just the front door. Folks who don't sell easy. He tapped the page with one thick finger. They get moved. Jack's eyes tracked the printed bullet points beneath the heading. Phase 1, acquisition of majority lots. Phase 2, compliance enforcement. Phase 3, legal pressure. Liens, forced sales. At the bottom, in red ink. One chilling line. Holdout, forced compliance likely. And beside it, handwritten in neat block letters, Sullivan. The porch light buzzed above Jack's head, the only sound for a long moment. Max let out a low growl, like he could smell the threat in the ink itself. Jack shut the binder slowly. So it was never about HOA dues. It's about land. Cole's jaw flexed. That's my read. Linda, she's just a mouthpiece. Lion's the hand up the puppet's back. They want Cedar Ridge under their flag, not yours. Jack looked out over his property, the weathered barn, the chicken coop still scarred with the word lean, the flag swaying stubborn against the dawn breeze. All of it. Suddenly mapped and cataloged in some corporate binder, his name circled like a target. Deputy Harris walked up, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was a small black USB drive. Found this too, he said, marked for the HOA chair. Couldn't open it, might be encrypted. Cole took the bag, slipped it into his coat. His voice dropped. Jack, I'll be straight with you. This isn't just about paperwork anymore. You're officially in their way. That file says they're gonna come harder, more pressure, less subtle. And with the kind of resources Lyons got, he trailed off. Jack finished the thought. They don't lose often. The sheriff gave a slow nod. No, but I've seen what happens when a man stands his ground. Sometimes that's the only thing that stops a machine like this. Jack felt the weight of those words. He thought of Afghanistan, of the nights when everything came down to holding a single outpost, refusing to yield an inch. He thought of Max, loyal and unyielding, ready to fight until his last breath. And now Cedar Ridge was the battlefield. Linda's voice echoed in his memory. Cedar Ridge has eyes everywhere. The drone had proved her right. Lion wasn't just a corporation. It was surveillance, intimidation, lawfare, everything at once, and they'd written his name in red. Jack set his hand on the binder, fingers firm against the cover, then let them come. Cole studied him for a long moment. The sheriff's weathered face said he'd seen too many men swallowed by fights bigger than themselves. But there was something in his eyes to respect, maybe even trust. "I'll keep what I can off the books," Cole said. "But make no mistake, Jack, you're the holdout. They'll want to make an example out of you." Jack looked down at Max, who sat alert at his side, ears pricked, eyes sharp. Then he looked back at the binder marked Lion. "They'll find out quick," he said, voice steady as steel. "Examples can cut both ways." The sun broke over Cedar Ridge just then, light spilling across the trees, glinting off the flagpole where the stars and stripes snapped hard in the morning wind. To Jack, it didn't look like a warning anymore. It looked like a challenge. By the time the sun climbed high over Cedar Ridge, the word had spread, not by phones or email, but in the way things always spread in small towns, through quiet conversations, nods across fences, a whispered mention at the feed store. Jack didn't call anyone for help. He didn't have to. The first to arrive was Mr. Howard, shuffling down the gravel lane with a wire brush in hand, his old knees creaking but his jaw set. "Heard about what happened," he said, eyes locking on the spray-painted word "lean" still slashed across the side of Jack's chicken coop. "Figured you could use a hand." Not long after, Mrs. Duffy came with her teenage son carrying buckets of soapy water and rags. Then came two more families, each armed with something: paint, tools, elbow grease. Within an hour, the once quiet yard was buzzing with the rhythm of work and the low hum of conversation. Max paced along the fence, ears twitching, as if he too felt the strange unity pulling in around his master's home. Jack stood back for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Brushes scraped, buckets sloshed, laughter cut through the still air. The black spray paint that had screamed LIEN began to fade, then disappear altogether under fresh strokes of paint. It wasn't just about cleaning, it was about reclaiming. "Don't let M scare you," Mr. Howard muttered as he scrubbed, sweat running down the side of his face. "They tried the same thing with my boy up in Oak Hollow years back, that thought they could bleed him with fines until he broke. He didn't, neither will you." Jack gave a quiet nod. Words didn't come easy, but gratitude sat heavy in his chest. These weren't soldiers, weren't deputies, weren't bound to him by anything but geography and a quiet sense of right. Yet here they were, fighting in the only way they could, side by side with brushes and buckets instead of rifles. By late afternoon, the coop stood clean again, paint drying in neat strokes that covered the scar of intimidation. Fresh boards had been hammered into place where vandals had pried. What had been an act of violation now looked more like a badge of resilience. Neighbors lingered in the yard, sipping lemonade brought by Mrs. Duffy, kids running circles round Max, who tolerated the commotion with patient eyes. Jack leaned against the porch rail, the corner of his mouth tugging upward for the first time in days. For a fleeting moment, Cedar Ridge felt whole again, but it didn't last. The sound of an engine broke the peace just before dusk. A white SUV rolled slow down the gravel, its polished frame catching the fading light. Everyone on the porch went quiet, their eyes narrowing. Linda grit. The SUV came to a stop at the end of Jack's drive. The window slid down, and there she was, chin high, lips tight, sunglasses reflecting the cluster of neighbors standing shoulder to shoulder on Jack's porch. She didn't get out. She didn't need to. Her voice carried sharp as glass. "Enjoy your little party while it lasts." She held up a crisp white envelope between two manicured fingers. "Final notice, 48 hours. No one spoke. The envelope fluttered slightly in her grip, catching the breeze like a threat dressed in legal paper. Jack stepped forward, Max shadowing him. He stopped halfway down the drive, arms loose at his sides, eyes steady on her. Linda's lip curled. "Non-compliance will not be tolerated. Cedar Ridge is under covenant law, whether you accept it or not. The deadline stands, 2 days. Her words dropped into the silence like stones into deep water. Jack didn't move closer. He didn't take the envelope. He just stood, calm as steel, letting the weight of the moment hang. Max let out a low growl, chest vibrating with the sound. From the porch, Mr. Howe called out, voice hoarse but loud enough to carry. "This isn't your street, Linda. You don't own it, and you don't own him." Murmurs rose behind him, quiet affirmations from neighbors who'd never dared speak up before. For once, Linda wasn't facing Jack alone. She was facing all of Cedar Ridge. Linda's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. She let the envelope fall, dropping it onto the gravel like a gauntlet, then rolled the window up. The SUV backed out, tires crunching, taillights glowing red as it vanished into the twilight. Silence returned, heavy and loaded. The envelope lay at Jack's feet, pale against the dirt. He didn't bend to pick it up. Instead, he turned back toward the porch, toward the people who had painted, scrubbed, and stood watch with him all day 48 hours, Jack said simply. The group exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew what it meant. The line had been drawn. The fight wasn't over, it was only beginning. Max nudged his leg, eyes locked on the road where the SUV had disappeared. Jack rested a hand on the dog's head, steadying himself. They want to test us, he murmured. Then they'll see what it looks like when neighbors don't break. The porch light clicked on behind him as dusk turned to night. The coupe stood clean. The flag still waved. And Cedar Ridge waited for the storm that was sure to come. The night was still when it started. Jack sat on the porch with Max stretched at his feet. The hum of crickets, weaving into the quiet. The envelope Linda had dropped earlier that day still lay on the kitchen table, unopened. Jack didn't need to read it. He already knew the message. Comply or break. It was close to midnight when Max lifted his head, ears pricked. His growl came low and steady, the sound of a storm building. Jack leaned forward, scanning the shadows at the edge of the lane. That was when he heard it, the faint crunch of gravel. Then the sharp clatter of metal hitting pavement. A hiss followed. At first, it sounded like a leaking tire. Then the air shifted, a chemical bite stinging Jack's nostrils. Gas. A canister rolled to a stop in the middle of the road, spinning slowly as it spewed a white plume. Within seconds, the smoke thickened, curling through the night like a living thing. Back, Max. Jack barked, yanking the dog inside. The shepherd resisted, barking wildly, chest heaving with fury. The air outside grew dense, acrid, burning Jack's throat. Even from the porch, across the street, voices cried out. Windows slammed shut. Coughing neighbors shouted as the haze spread through Cedar Ridge. Porch lights flickered on one after another, eyes waking to the same nightmare. Someone screamed, a panicked, desperate sound. Children's coughs echoed through the night. Max clawed at the door, teeth bared, frantic to charge the source of the threat. Jack's military instinct surged back, sharp and automatic. He yanked a wet rag from the sink, tied it across his mouth, and scanned the yard through the smoke. Shapes blurred, shadows danced. Whoever had thrown that canister was gone now. But the message was clear. Fear wasn't just a tactic anymore, it was a weapon. Then, as if the smoke weren't enough, the lights went out. Every house along Cedar Ridge plunged into blackness. Every porch light, every lamp, every hum of electricity snapped silent all at once. The entire neighborhood disappeared into shadow, except for one place, Linda's house. Her windows glared bright against the darkness, each room blazing like a lighthouse. The soft whir of a generator carried through the still night air. While neighbors stumbled blind and choking, Linda's home glowed untouched, a fortress of smug defiance. Jack stood at his window, watching her silhouette cross behind the blinds. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't panicked. She was waiting. Lion had moved from shadows into open play, and Linda was standing right in their spotlight. Coughs echoed down the street. Jack grabbed a flashlight, pulled on a pair of gloves, and stepped outside, Max at his heel. Together they moved through the haze, checking on neighbors, guiding people back inside, shouting reassurance into the smoke. Cover your faces. Stay low, Jack yelled, his voice muffled through the cloth. Mrs. Duffy and her son stumbled out onto their porch, eyes red, hacking coughs shaking their frames. Jack shoved the flashlight into the boy's hand, then helped the woman back inside. Mr. Howard leaned against his gate. Wheezing hard, Jack got under his arm, half carrying him back to the safety of his house, while Max barked at the swirling air as though he could tear the smoke apart with his teeth. One by one, Jack made his rounds. He had no badge, no authority, but in that moment, every frightened eye turned toward him. The war zone he thought he'd left overseas had landed in his own neighborhood. An instinct told him the same thing it always had. Hold the line. By the time the gas began to dissipate, Cedar Ridge looked battered, curtains drawn tight, neighbors huddled together, the smell of chemicals clinging to everything. The black silence of the blackout pressed heavy against the houses. Only Linda's home still glowed. Jack stood at the edge of his yard, staring at the glaring lights across the street. He didn't need the binder, the threats, or the final notice anymore. The truth was burning in front of him. Linda wasn't just a woman with rules and fines. She wasn't just a loud neighbor obsessed with order. She was the conduit, the bridge between Lion's corporate machine and Cedar Ridge's quiet dirt roads. Max growled deep in his chest, his gaze fixed on the glowing house. Jack rested a hand on the shepherd's head, feeling the tension buzzing under the dog's skin. Yeah, Jack muttered, voice hoarse. Me too. The night dragged long, broken only by the distant hum of Linda's generator. Jack stayed on his porch, rifle propped beside him, flashlight cutting through the dark every so often as he scanned the street. What the fear was working. He could feel it in the way the neighborhood had gone silent, in the way children's cries had quieted into uneasy sleep. Lion wanted Cedar Ridge to buckle, to see resistance as pointless. But standing there, with Max pressed against his side and the stars and stripes still swaying stubborn on the pole above, Jack knew one thing with certainty: they'd underestimated him. They thought gas and shadows would scare him back into line. They thought Linda's house glowing against the black night would remind him who held the power. But it only lit up the truth clearer than ever. The fight wasn't coming. It was already here. The smoke had barely cleared when the next strike came. Jack was still on his porch, rifle across his knees, when Max's ears pricked again. This time, it wasn't footsteps or a car engine. It was a hum. Low at first, like the far-off buzz of cicada, but growing louder, sharper, mechanical. Jack stood, scanning the dark horizon. Over the ridge of trees, faint red lights blinked in unison. Then, one by one, they rose from the lake, shimmering against the black water. 6 of them. Drones. They hovered like vultures over Cedar Ridge, wings of steel cutting through the night air. Their rotors screamed against the silence, the sound of precision and menace. Max barked furiously, teeth flashing in the glow. Jack lifted the rifle but held his fire. Shooting one down now would only announce his position. He watched instead, jaw clenched, as the machines spread out information, like hunters circling prey. Then came the boats. The steady growl of twin engines broke across the lake, carrying through the night like war drums. 2 speedboats, lights dimmed, slicing the dark water straight toward Jack's property. Shadows stood on deck, rifles slung, armor gleaming faintly beneath the starlight. It wasn't intimidation anymore, it was invasion. Sheriff Dawson's voice cracked through Jack's earpiece, sharp and steady. Alpha Team, eyes up. This is it. From the tree line, 4 figures emerged, Dawson's deputies, the last ones willing to risk their badges, their lives, to hold Cedar Ridge. They moved fast, rifles at the ready, fanning out along the dirt road like men who knew they might not walk it again. Jack felt Max pressed close to his leg, muscles tight as a drawn bow. He reached down, scratched the shepherd behind the ear. Stay sharp, buddy. The drones shifted, scanning beams slicing across the ground like knives of light. The hum deepened as they locked onto positions, marking targets. Hold the line, Dawson ordered, voice unflinching. It wasn't just command, it was a vow. The speedboats hit shallow water, engines cutting. The silhouettes aboard leaped into the surf, boots splashing, rifles raised. They moved with discipline, not like thugs, but trained operators. Line hadn't sent a message tonight, they'd sent professionals. Jack dropped to a knee, sighting down his scope. He counted 7 men on the lead boat, 6 on the other, 13 shadows moving in tight formation, heading straight for his land. The first drone dipped lower, scanning beams flaring across Jack's porch. Max snarled, barking until his voice turned ragged. Alpha, now, Dawson shouted. Gunfire split the night. The deputies lit up the shoreline, muzzle flashes tearing holes in the darkness. The sound rolled over the lake, loud, violent, final. The first wave of intruders stumbled, water exploding around them. 2 dropped fast, swallowed by the black lake. The rest pressed forward, firing back in short, brutal bursts. The drones swooped down, one after another, spitting sparks and crackling arcs of light. Stun rounds hammered the ground like hail, tearing bark from trees, shattering porch wood inches from Jack's head. He fired back, precise, measured. 1 round, 1 target. A man went down screaming. Another dropped without a sound. Max lunged forward, dragging Jack's aim to a drone sweeping too close. Jack squeezed metal, shattered. Sparks rained. The machine spiraled into the lake in a hiss of steam, but 5 still circled overhead, relentless. Dawson's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back to cover. Keep the line tight. The deputies pulled behind trees and stone, trailing fire with the advancing squad. Every shot was answered. Every move counted. This wasn't a scare tactic line meant to take Cedar Ridge tonight. Jack's blood burned hot, but his mind stayed cold. He shifted positions, leading Max toward the side gate, firing as he moved. The enemy tried to flank, slipping through the reeds, but Dawson's shotgun barked thunder, blasting them back into the lake. For every man that fell, another seemed to rise from the boats. For every drone Jack dropped, the others grew bolder, screaming lower across the treetops. Hold the line. Dawson roared again, defiance ringing in his voice even as bullets shredded the fence beside him. Jack could feel it, the line between order and chaos, between freedom and surrender stretching thinner by the second. But it hadn't broken, not yet. The firefight dragged on, brutal and close. Cedar Ridge was no longer a quiet neighborhood. It was a battlefield. Every porch, every fence, every shadow was lit by the staccato flash of rifles. Max lunged at the noise, barking through smoke and fire, never wavering. Dawson's men fought with the desperation of those who had nowhere left to run. And Jack fought like a man who had seen war before and knew exactly what was at stake. By the time the last magazine clicked empty, the lake was littered with wreckage, a boat smoldering, 3 drones sparking in the reeds, bodies drifting in the current. But 5 enemy soldiers still advanced, crawling over the embankment, weapons steady. Jack pulled Max close, slammed another round into the chamber, and set his sights on the shadows breaking through. The battle wasn't over, it was only begin. The night had gone from bad to worse. The first wave should have broken them. Any normal neighborhood, any normal man would have folded after drones, boats, and hired muscle stormed the shoreline, but Jack wasn't normal, and Cedar Ridge wasn't ready to die quiet. The lake still churned with wreckage when the second wave hit. This time they came with smoke from the dark water. Canisters arced into the sky, clattered across Jack's yard. Thick gray plumes erupted, rolling fast and heavy. The acrid stench clawed its way into his lungs, burning eyes, stinging throat. Max coughed out a furious bark, hacking but standing his ground. Then the drones dropped lower. 6 beams of white light cut through the smoke like swords, turning night into a warped, artificial day. They swept back and forth, blinding, relentless. Every shadow was hunted down. Every scrap of cover burned away under the glare. Gas masks. Sheriff Dawson barked from the tree line. His alpha deputies scrambled, yanking on gear. Jack didn't have one. He never needed one. He just tied a strip of cloth around his nose and mouth. Eyes streaming, heart pounding. The enemy moved in behind the smoke. Figures rose from the lake like ghosts. Rifles shouldered, boots hammering the dock. Muffled voices called signals, sharp and disciplined. Lion soldiers weren't mercenaries now, they were warfighters. And they were coming straight for his porch. Jack dropped to a crouch, rifle snug, finger steady. Through the haze he caught glimpses, the shape of a helmet, the shine of a rifle barrel. He squeezed. A body dropped hard against the dock, splashing into the lake. Another shadow stumbled back, clutching his side, but the rest pressed forward. The drones shifted in unison, spotlights pinning Jack like prey. Bullets shredded wood around him, splinters flying. He rolled behind the post, breath ragged, Max snarling at his side. "Stay with me, boy," Jack muttered. Max didn't need telling twice. The shepherd shot forward, teeth bared, slamming into a soldier who broke through the smoke at the foot of the porch. The man screamed, weapon falling as Max dragged him down. Jaws locked on his arm. Jack rose and fired again, taking another in the chest. The soldier collapsed, body tumbling down the steps, blood smearing across the deck. The porch shook with the weight of the fight, bullets tearing through railing and siding. Smoke crawled thicker, lights blinding. But Jack stood tall. This wasn't his first war, and he wasn't about to lose his last. From the yard came Dawson's shout, "Hold the line." The sheriff and his team laid down suppressive fire, holding the enemy at bay. But they were stretched thin, pinned from both sides. Every drone was cutting off angles, forcing them into open ground. Then Jack saw it movement on the dock. A soldier broke from the pack, sprinting low with a black duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He moved with intent, not toward Jack, not toward Dawson, toward the waterline. Something was in that bag, something Lion didn't want found. Jack raised his rifle, but the smoke was too thick, the angle too narrow. Max. The shepherd exploded off the porch like a missile. He hit the man mid-stride, teeth finding flesh. The soldier screamed, stumbled, clawed for his pistol, but Max was faster. The bag slipped from his grip, tumbling across the dock. Jack vaulted the steps, sprinting hard, lungs burning against the smoke. He fired a quick burst, cutting down another figure rushing to help. Then he was there, boots pounding wood. Max still locked onto his target. "Down," Jack ordered. Max obeyed instantly, teeth releasing as Jack stepped in, rifle butt cracking against the soldier's skull. The man dropped, lifeless, but the duffel was already sliding toward the edge. Caught in the chaos, Jack lunged too late. The bag hit the water with a heavy splash and sank fast, bubbles racing up from the black surface. "No," Jack hissed. He could swim for it, but not now, not with the fight still raging. The drones screamed overhead, red sensors flickering, locking onto the dock. Spotlights converged, beams blinding. Jack grabbed Max and dove behind a piling as rounds shredded the planks where they'd just stood. Dawson's voice cut through the chaos. Fall back. Regroup. But Jack wasn't listening. His eyes stayed fixed on the lake, on the widening ripples where the bag had gone under. Whatever was inside, documents, drives, explosives that mattered enough for Lion to risk everything. And now it belonged to the depths. Gunfire flared again. Jack spun, dropping another intruder climbing the dock. Max leaped at the next, tearing cloth, snarling deep and furious. The sheriff's men poured rounds into the waterline, holding the invaders back inch by inch. But for every enemy that fell, two more seemed to appear. The night stretched on like a fever dream, smoke choking, lights searing, bullets screaming through the dark. The dock rattled under the storm, planks splitting, water boiling with fire and fury. And still Jack stood, rifle steady, dog unbroken, a warfighter on his own land, holding the line. By the time the drones pulled back, when the last of Lion's men finally melted into the black water, Cedar Ridge looked like a war zone. Spent casings littered the porch. The dock was splintered and smoking, and the smell of gas and gunpowder hung thick in the air. Max stood by Jack's side, chest heaving, muzzle streaked red. Dawson staggered toward the dock, deputies trailing, faces gray and hollow behind their masks. "You're all right," Dawson rasped. Jack nodded once, staring out at the lake. They wanted something hidden, bad enough to throw bodies at it. "The bag?" Dawson asked. Jack's eyes stayed fixed on the ripples still dancing on the black surface. "It's down there. Whatever it is, they didn't want us to see it." Dawson spat, blood, wiped his mouth. "Then we're going to find it?" Jack rested a hand on Max's head. The shepherd pressed it firm against his leg. The night wasn't over. The war wasn't done. And as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, Jack knew this fight had only just begun. The battle left Cedar Ridge smoldering. Smoke hung over the lake, broken boards floated in the current, and the echoes of gunfire still rattled inside every chest. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Jack stood on the dock, rifle loose in his hands. Max pressed tight against his leg, both of them staring at the black water where the duffel had sunk. Behind him, Dawson's deputies gathered, faces streaked with sweat and soot. Then the crunch of tires cut through the quiet. An engine roared up the dirt road, the low growl of an SUV. Headlights cut across the smoke, beams stabbing through the mess of debris and blood. The vehicle didn't slow. It barreled forward, tires spitting gravel, hood glistening in the artificial light. Jack turned. Sheriff Dawson raised his hand. Linda, the SUV fishtailed as it hit the curve by the lake, trying to swing wide, aiming for the open road. But Dawson wasn't about to let her vanish. "Block her," he barked. Two squad trucks swerved from the trilla, cutting across the dirt. Ties screamed as steel met steel. The SUV tried to push through, engine howling. But the deputies held the barricade. Sparks shot into the night. Glass shattered, and the heavy vehicle ground to a halt. Pinned inches from the lake's edge, the driver's door flew open. Linda Graves stumbled out, hair wild, face pale under the flashing red and blue. She clutched a handbag like it was armor, eyes darting from the sheriff to the crowd gathering behind him. "You can't do this," she screamed, voice sharp enough to slice through the ringing night. "I'm the president of this community. You people work for me." Dawson stepped forward, boots steady. Shotgun slung across his chest. His voice was low, even final. "No, ma'am, you work for Lion, and that ends tonight." Linda shook her head violently, pointing a shaking finger at Jack. "This is his fault. He's the one stirring up trouble. He's a squatter, a criminal. None of this would have happened if he'd just enough." Dawson cut her off. With a single nod, two deputies closed in. They grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back. The snap of cold steel rang out across the lakeshore. Handcuffs locked tight. Linda shrieked, thrashing against their grip. "Do you know who I am? Do you know what's coming for all of you?" Her words echoed, sharp and desperate, but the lake swallowed them whole. By then, the residents had gathered, families who had hidden in basements, neighbors who had clung to one another in the dark. They stepped out into the flashing lights. One by one, they formed a circle, silent at first, then louder voices rising in anger. "That's her. She brought them here. She nearly got us all killed." The crowd surged, fury breaking like a wave. Some shouted curses. Others spit in the dirt at her feet. A woman near the front sobbed openly, clutching her child as she pointed at Linda. "You tried to take our homes," she cried. "You let them terrorize us." Linda's face twisted, but she had no answer. The deputy shoved her toward the back of a squad car. She kicked once, a wild, useless swing of her heel, but Dawson's glare froze her cold. He opened the door himself, pushed her down, and slammed it shut with a sound that echoed finality. Jack watched from the dock, Max leaning against his leg, eyes fixed on the SUV that had been her throne just moments ago. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt something shift in Cedar Ridge. The fear, the whispers, the quiet submission, they cracked under the weight of truth. Tonight, the masks had fallen. The residents had seen the hand behind their suffering, and for the first time, they'd seen that hand shackled. Dawson turned back to the crowd, voice firm but steady. "This isn't over," he said. "Lion is bigger than one woman, but tonight you took your ground back." The people of Cedar Ridge stood taller at those words, shoulders squaring, heads lifting. For once, they weren't just neighbors, they were survivors. Jack reached down, scratched Max's head. "Good boy," he whispered. The shepherd's tail thumped once against the dirt. Out on the lake, the smoke cleared, dawn's first light touching the water, and though Jack knew the war with Lion was far from finished, tonight at least, Cedar Ridge had won a battle of its own. The lights from the squad cars washed over the lakeshore long after Linda was hauled away. Red and blue pulses danced across the water, flashing against tired faces and smoke-stained clothes. The crowd of neighbors lingered, restless, like soldiers who'd won a fight but still didn't know the size of the war. Sheriff Cole Dawson stood at the center, his hat low, his eyes shadowed by the glow. He looked older than he had just hours earlier, like the weight of what he was about to say pressed down harder than the gunfight itself. "Listen up," he said, his voice rough but steady. "You need to hear this before the rumors start flying." The chatter hushed. Even Max stopped his restless pacing and sat at Jack's side, ears twitching. "This wasn't just Linda Graves playing queen of the neighborhood," Dawson continued. "She's part of something bigger, something called Lion." The name dropped like a stone into the crowd. A few heads nodded. Some had heard whispers, but most faces turned blank. Confused, Dawson drew a folded paper from his pocket, holding it up under the flashing lights. "We pulled this from her SUV. It's not HOA bylaws or neighborhood rules. It's corporate documents, planning maps, expansion schedules. Lion isn't a homeowners group. It's a development corporation, and it's got more money than this whole county put together." The murmurs started again, sharp and angry. A man near the front spat into the dirt. "So all this fines, threats, spray paint, it was business. Business backed by muscle," Dawson said flatly. "They target neighborhoods on the edge of development. They use people like Linda to soften the ground, make it look local. When folks resist, they escalate. Drones, sabotage, intimidation. They squeeze until you break." Jack tightened his jaw. "And if you don't break," Dawson's eyes found his, "then they take it by force." The sheriff shifted, pointing toward the black water lapping against the dock. "They tried it here tonight, and before Linda went down, one of her boys tossed something into that lake, a black duffel." Jack remembered it clearly, the shape, the splash. Max lunging too late to stop it. "What's in it?" one of the neighbors asked. "We don't know yet," Dawson admitted, "but based on the documents we already have, my guess is it's the motherlode. Contracts, payouts, maybe even names. Proof of just how far Lion's reach goes. Proof that what happened here wasn't random." The words hung heavy. Proof. That was what everyone needed. What every homeowner feared would never come. "We'll dredge the lake," Dawson promised. "Might take days, might take weeks, but we'll find it. And when we do, it's not just Linda Graves who's going down. It's the machine behind her." The crowd erupted then, not in cheers, but in a low growl of anger and determination. They weren't afraid anymore. They were hungry for the truth. Jack stayed quiet, one hand resting on Max's head. The dog leaned into him, steady and strong, as if grounding him. Jack knew how these fights worked. The foot soldiers fell first, but the real battle was always with the ones who never showed their faces, the ones counting dollars in offices miles away. Line wasn't finished, but neither was Cedar Ridge. Dawson looked out over the group, his voice rising one last time. "Go home tonight, lock your doors, rest. You've all learned it. But remember this: Lion thought Cedar Ridge would roll over. You proved them wrong, and I promise you, they won't get a second chance to try the same stunt." The sheriff's words cut through the dark, steady as bedrock. For the first time since this began, people straightened their shoulders. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had hardened into resolve. Jack exhaled slowly, eyes on the lake. Somewhere beneath that surface, the bag sat waiting, heavy with secrets. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But tonight, at least, they'd dragged the truth into the light. The night had finally given way to quiet. For the first time in weeks, Cedar Ridge wasn't echoing with shouts, sirens, or the whir of machines. the chaos had burned itself out, leaving behind a strange but welcome stillness. Linda's black SUV sat at the edge of the lot by the sheriff's station, its tires charred, its glossy paint dulled under the fluorescent lights. A county deputy was already cataloging the vehicle's contents: contracts, HOA records, a half-burnt notebook. The car wasn't going anywhere, and neither was Linda. She sat in holding now, wrists bruised from the cuffs, lips pressed into a tight, furious line. For years she had played Queen of Cedar Ridge, but this morning she was just another suspect. Back at the lakefront, the aftermath stretched wide. The shoreline was littered with broken drones, plastic casings, and pieces of shattered smoke canisters. The dock itself bore scorch marks, its wood blackened in places where sparks had jumped. Yet through it all, the community still stood. At dawn, the residents gathered. Some carried buckets of water to wash soot off siding. Others hammered loose planks back into place. The sound of nails ringing sharp against the still morning. The smell of burnt powder lingered, but it mixed now with something softer: fresh coffee carried out from thermoses, cinnamon rolls a neighbor had pulled from her oven. For the first time in a long while, the people of Cedar Ridge weren't looking at each other with suspicion or fear. They weren't hiding behind closed doors. They were standing shoulder to shoulder, the sleeves rolled up, doing the work together. Jack stayed near his cabin, repairing the chicken coop that had been splattered with paint weeks before. The neighbors had already scrubbed the siding clean, the hateful red letters long gone. He worked slowly, the morning light spilling across the boards as he set a new hinge in place. Max lay stretched out on the porch, chest rising and falling steadily, one ear twitching every so often as if still on alert. Every so often, someone would walk by and clap Jack on the back, offering thanks. "If it weren't for you, we'd all still be trapped," one man said. Another brought a bag of nails, insisting Jack keep them. A group of kids even ran over to pet Max, their giggles filling the air as the German Shepherd lifted his head and thumped his tail. Jack didn't say much. He never had been the kind to make speeches, but inside he felt a shift. Weeks ago, this place had been a battlefield at Tot, the suffocating neighborhood where rules were weaponized, and where one man stood alone against a tide. Now standing in the cool glow of sunrise, Cedar Ridge felt different. It felt alive again. Sheriff Dawson arrived mid, his patrol truck crunching over gravel. He stepped out, stretching his shoulders as if the weight of the last days had finally begun to lift. He gathered a few residents and gave them the news: Linda would be held without bail until her arraignment. The county was already drafting charges that went far beyond simple HOA misconduct. With Lyon exposed, there'd be investigations reaching higher than Cedar Ridge. When the sheriff spoke, the people listened. And when he was finished, they clapped, not for him, but for themselves, for having endured, for refusing to give in. Later, as the sun rose higher, the work slowed. Families returned to their porches. Some stood by the lake, staring out across the water where the last of the smoke drifted away. The surface shimmered gold beneath the morning rays, as though the whole ordeal had been washed clean. Jack eased into his chair on the porch, his old rocker creaking as it settled under his weight. He reached down and rested a hand on Max's head. The dog sighed, a low rumble of contentment in his chest, and closed his eyes again. For years, Jack had carried the sense that he was just passing through, never quite belonging, never planting roots. He had thought Cedar Ridge would be the same, a place to live for a while before moving on. But the night had stripped away illusions. What remained was raw and real. Neighbors who had fought beside him, a town that had stared down the shadow of something bigger than themselves, and a dog who had never once left his side. The first birds of morning trilled from the trees, their notes sharp against the soft lapping of the lake. Jack leaned back and watched the horizon brighten. The sky brushed with orange and rose. For the first time in years, he didn't feel restless. He didn't feel like running. This, he realized, was home.